I came upstairs a couple minutes ago to open up the project file and prepare to shoot this breakdown video. And I wanted to make the intro out on my balcony, but it started raining and I think it just stopped. So let's take a look. Yeah, alright, we're good. If you look out there, you can see the Cologne Cathedral and Colonius, the network tower on the right. So, I'm gonna head down, go out on the balcony, and film the rest of this. See you in a sec. Alright, here's the intro to the video that I was talking about. This is my balcony. But, I'm gonna make this video a little longer, because I think the track's got a really cool backstory. And it all started when I was in a Starbucks in Paris. I just went on a weekend trip, and really dope trip, but not the point here. I was sitting at the Starbucks waiting for my train at like the northern train station in Paris, and I started messing around on my like secondary laptop where I have an old version of Ableton installed, and I started putting on so many random effects on like a sine wave. I just used like some sine wave out of Serum or Operator, and then I came up with this really wonky pluck percussion thing. I don't really know. And what happened then was I realized like, yo, it sounds pretty cool. And then somehow I wrote an entire track around that starting point. So you don't always need to have like a great idea at the beginning. And this is, in my opinion, one of my better songs. So that's the story behind it. I also went ahead and spent a lot of time getting it to the final version. I'll talk about that when I break down the project upstairs. But, you know, inspiration comes in waves and it comes from everywhere. Just something to keep in mind.
Alright, project file time. I'm going to switch it up here and start with the instruments instead of the drums. So here's how they sound from the breakdown. So the first thing to mention, of course, is here's the pluck that I've been talking about this whole time. Very subtle, but just this guy. A little bit of tonal delay, which I added, and I go ahead and I add an auto filter and then automate that throughout the whole track. But as you can see, it plays the entire time. So the Reese Bass really glues everything together in both of the breakdowns. Here's the MIDI where I went ahead and I played the root note of the chords. And I made the bass here an operator, which is an FM synth. But in this case, I went ahead and I changed the algorithm of the output for the different oscillators by clicking these 4 squares and selecting the last one. And in this case, it means each of the oscillators plays independently of one another, meaning there's no FMing going on. So I went ahead and I chose 2 saw wave digitals for oscillator A and B, and then on oscillator A, I detuned it by 27 cents on the fine tune knob. I then went ahead and I automated some different parameters, like the filter cutoff here, and then I have this rack with a low pass and a high pass filter, which I automate here during the build to have things kind of fade out and create tension and energy into the drop. And you can hear how it's starting to lose low end, and that creates tension and fades out just as I mentioned. So in the breakdown, some of the other melodic and harmonic things that I have playing are this little ARP here in the second break. And it opens up here with the filter, the automation. It's a simple patch, and it has tonal delay, reverb to push it back in the mix, as well as an EQ, Soothe 2, a delay, send, and track spacer from this ARP fill. And this plays in both the first and the second break. It's like this. Pretty simple. And then on top of it, I have some ambience and atmosphere, like this one from Drazo. Adding a little texture in the background. And then there's this vocal pad that I went ahead, warped, pitched up 1 semitone, Complex Pro, Formants down, Envelope down, and it sounds like this. Also opening up here with the filter cutoff, and I've got reverb on it as well to push it back in the mix, and then an auto pan with the phase set down to 0, so now I'm controlling the volume and not the pan left to right. So another really important element here in the track is the brass stab, and it plays the melody that happens throughout the track in the drop and in the post drop, like this. And it's from a Sennheiser pack, and ironically a friend of mine named Matto made that pack, and he has so many dope samples in there. I actually used a couple others in this project file, so definitely recommend you going and copying that. There's some processing on here, like some EQ, OTT, Soundtoys radiator to drive it and add a little bit of grit, and then I added some delay. And I'm going to talk about the fake out here really quickly, but in the second drop, there's this part where I went and did a quick fake out. It's just 1 bar long, and that's where I had this Serum effects, which I go ahead and I automate like this with the flanger. Straight from the underground. So I'm not usually the most creative producer, but I thought that was a cool part, and I went ahead and, like I said, automated this flanger here in Serum Effects, and that's what gives it kind of the whole unique vibe when there's the fake out. Something important to mention about the brass stab is that the reverses that happen before each one are really important. It's amazing how much a reverse can do to a sound and really fill things out. So always recommend doing that. And I didn't want that sidechain, so it's outside of the sidechain group here. Alright, so let's talk about some of the basses here. I've got this group called Drop Bass and Tom, where I have my tom thump, which gives a lot of rhythm and groove to the track. Here's that. And you can see I have everything flattened audio here, and the reason for that is when I go ahead and I make my basses, I like to add some release to these 808 tails, and that makes everything a little more natural, but I want to make sure that nothing is overlapping with any of the other layers to make the low end really muddy. So you can see I have it all faded out like here, but there's 2 main basses, Drop Groove 1 and MH Bass Resample. No idea what MH stands for if I'm being honest, but this MH bass plays the same melody as the brass stab. And if you play them together, like over here, they really go ahead and complement each other well. Then I've got this Drop Groove 1, which during the drop itself and not the post drop like I just showed you, goes ahead and plays things in between. This is how that one sounds. So just like 2 notes going on, the root note and then a semitone up. A lot of processing here, and like I said, it's already frozen or resampled, so I already flattened some of the processing, but nothing too crazy. Saturation, erosion. Let's see what I've got here in Serum Effects. But otherwise, EQ, some downsampling there to give it that bit crush feeling, and the basses together with the tom sound like this. So I want to show you guys how I made some of these cool bass shots here in the project. Here's how they sound in context. To solo in on which ones I meant, it's these 2 right here. Let's talk about this one right here, the Wonky Wub. So I started off with the processing by using my Fat Rack, where I've got an EQ to go ahead and clean things up. Then I use a saturator, another EQ with a notch and a peak. OTT, I turned off FabFilter Saturn, but then in the Fat Rack I've got overdrive, erosion, and another saturator. And then you can hear the reverb throw that happens to give it a little bit of space and add a tail to it. But let's go over to the patch in Serum. It's from a project that I never ended up finishing, but it's 2 saw waves, where the oscillator B FM's oscillator A and is 2 octaves above it. I use a band 24 filter to shape the sound. Here in the effects, I've got a compressor in multiband mode, asymmetric distortion, phaser, an EQ with a peak and a notch that I go ahead and modulate as well, and then an MG Low 6 filter to clean things up. To show you what it sounds like here in the patch in Serum, it's like this. So pretty harsh, and that's why it's really helpful to use the Fat Rack with the different processing of the EQs, the peaks and the notches to clean things up. The other thing right here is this bass called the Paris bass. And I made that also in Serum right here. I did this one while I was sitting at Starbucks, just like the pluck, and it sounds like this. So you can hear there's so much low end, and it's just two interesting wavetables here. This one I believe is from the digital section, distorted sub right there, and then this one, it's also from the digital section. Both the randoms down at 0, a little bit of noise here with the inharmonic 2. I got the comb minus filter from the flanges section, and then in the effects, soft clipping for the distortion, as well as a couple peaks here that go ahead and modulate the sound a little bit, and then wrapping it up with an MG Low 18 filter. Both of those one-shots that I made are layered down here with a separate sub, and that's why they sound so hollow here on their own. But if I play it with the sub, it comes all together. And the reason I did that is, like I said, here in this one, when you go ahead and play it, you can hear how much low end there is, and it wasn't even easy to control that given that there was so much going on, so I went ahead and separated them out. Another cool bass shot that I've got going on this track is the Reese Fill, which plays at the turnaround of the drops, like this. And this is how it sounds on its own. So it's 2 notes, and you pitch bend from the one note to the next note. So like I said, Phrygian scale, root note, up 1 semitone, and then I've got the separate sub layered in here in my subgroup. I went ahead and added a lot of phasing, flanging, as well as a lot of notch filters to go ahead and give it that Reese sound. To talk about this subgroup here, I have this sub-processing rack that I like to use. I believe Crane, the producer who makes like future bass, hybrid trap and stuff, he's the one I got this from, but the kick type preset on your subgroup really kind of glues things together, fattens it up. Then a little bit of saturation, adding some upper harmonics, FabFilter Saturn, and then I'm going ahead and cutting everything above 175 out, making it mono here at the very end. Moving on to some of the effects in the track, something I want to show you guys how I did is this LFO spin, and that happens here after the fake out and second drop, like this. So pretty typical sound in house music, and I'm going to show you guys how you can make it in case you don't know. So the way I did this was I used Serum, I went ahead, opened up a default patch, and I put one long MIDI note down. So I'm going to go ahead and do that right now. I'm going to use the root key of the track, put it on the piano roll legato. Then in the patch, I'm going to take the randomness and pull it down to 0. And what I'm going to do is take LFO1, add it to the chorus pitch. Here in the amount section, if you want to know exactly how much like 2 octaves is, you can type it in semitones. So you can do 24 ST, which is the default. But if you'd want to do 36 semitones or 3 octaves, you can type in whatever amount of semitones you want, and then it'll convert it to the appropriate amount. So 12 semitones, it's like 9 or something. We'll go back to 24. And then I'm going to go ahead and change this mode here for the LFO to trigger and turn off the BPM sync. What I'm going to do is, to be really technical with it, if I go and I use this tool called Swiss Army Meter from Nora Labs, who also makes the sidechain plugin I use, you can go and see how many hertz correspond to each type of subdivision note inside of your project at that tempo. So I'm at 126 BPM, and then here if I look, a quarter note would be 2.1 hertz. You can change between hertz and milliseconds here with this Swiss Army Meter. Really cool, love that plugin. And I'm going to go ahead and start my rate of this LFO at 2.1 hertz. Then what I'm going to do is I'm going to make sure I have the automation arm selected here, and I'm going to turn off the record arm button. But with the automation arm, when I go ahead and I'm in the automation view, I can type an exact amount here, and I accidentally moved this from 2.1 to 2, so let's put it back to the right amount. I can type in a number, and while I'm recording, Ableton will then draw that automation curve. So let's say I want to go to a 64th note. That means I want it to eventually be at 33.6. And it's really hard to, like, if I would go ahead and draw this automation, there's the 1 point. How do I get it to be exactly 33.6? I can move it, ever so slightly, and, it's tedious. So what you can do is you put it at your starting point, you record without the channel being armed, like this. And then you can see what happens, how it went ahead, created the point when I touched the knob, and then I went ahead and manually typed it in using my keyboard. So I can do that, put this here, and in this case, I know exactly that it's starting at the subdivision of a half note and ending at a 64th note. And then I would go ahead and just adjust the slope of the curve to my liking. Back to the sound that I have resampled here, I added some tonal delay, which I automated up here, kind of at the beginning, going up to 30%, and then more so it fades out as time goes on. And then right here, I have another rack that I have called Fade, and that includes an auto filter and even more delay. That's different than the tonal delay, but this is a normal delay with a 1/3 sync rate. The drums in this track are pretty similar to a lot of the songs I make. I went ahead and used this kick. I think the transient, if I remember correctly, is from like a 7 Skies kick, and I made the tail myself. I've got a few different layers here for the clap 4, which is more than normal, but here's how they sound. And then in my filtered group, I have my hi-hats, closed hi-hat, shuffle hat, ride, snare, this perk right here, which goes ahead and adds some groove in the second half of the drops and in the post-drop section, which sounds like this. You can hear how it's panned. And then when I have that Reese fill playing, I have this fat snare, which is actually from the same pack as the brass shot. So the last thing to talk about here are the vocals. And I knew I wanted something dark, preferably like a rap vocal, and I'm really happy that I stumbled upon this sample. I went and I processed it by pitching it down 3 semitones. I warped it, and then I added some warp markers. You can see that the BPM here that it ended up being is nowhere close to the 126 that the project is right now. But if I take all of that off and then put it back to its normal pitch, the vocal sounds like this.
Straight from the underground.
So what I did is I chopped it up then and used it in different parts of the track. And I've got some processing to help make it sound a little thicker. First off, starting with the doubler here, Waves doubler. Cashmere's talked about this technique a lot. It's really helpful and adds a little width to a mono vocal like this. And then I also went ahead and in the chain made sure to remove some of the low end and then the side information, everything below like 300. After that, I have this delay send rack, and then here I went ahead and I automated the volume of the chain as well as the amount of feedback. So for instance, in the build, I wanted to lower the feedback, and then here in the post drop, I increased it so that the tail would kind of carry over into that section.
Straight from the underground.
And then you can hear how it pans left and right, and then kind of keeps going and carries over while everything's going on underneath of it. And then for both my reverb and my delay, I sidechain the dry signal to the wet signal, meaning that whenever the dry vocal is playing, the delay and the reverb sends get ducked down. And that's done in both of these racks. Here's the reverb version where I just have the tail at 775 milliseconds. After that, I just have some filtering going on as well as some gain. It doesn't even look like I'm automating the gain, but just the filter, opening things up here in the break. And then in the second break, I went ahead and I did this manually because I thought it was easier to end up doing, but I go ahead and I pan it left and right and then fade it out here with the volume like this.
Underground, 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 underground.
And in this case, it was just easier to do it manually. Sometimes you can go ahead and just automate it, but other times it's better just to force it and make it happen like that. After that, I just have a little bit of sidechain coming from the kick, but not the same amount that I have in my sidechain group, which is set to 100%. All right, everyone. I hope you were able to learn some cool stuff. I hope you enjoy the track. If you got any questions, drop a comment down below. I'd be happy to answer, and I'll see you in the next breakdown video. Peace.
Straight from the underground.